Today we'll be exploring Bibeksar, a rarely discussed Sevapanthi text from 1748. With the help of Arjun Singh Nirmala, we unpack 14 questions from a powerful back and forth between two Sikhs, written in a traditional question and answer format known as Prashnotari, which you might recognize from works by Bhai Mani Singh. What's the real difference between meditation and mere repetition? Can ignorance deepen devotion? And how does Sikh thought engage with Vedanta or non-duality? This episode takes you deep into Sikh mysticism, metaphor, and the path to self-realization.
To begin with, we're going to end up talking about a text called Bibeksar, and it's written in a question and answer format that some of us may already be familiar with. For instance, in some of Bhai Mani Singh's works, right? However, before we explore these texts and find out who the Non-Dualities are and how their philosophy is integral to understanding Sikhi and all the misconceptions that sit around that, I want to get to know a little bit more about your own background. Okay, so I want to know your kind of what's your upbringing been like, what are your family influences, and are there any moments in life that shaped your interest in Sikhi and pushed you towards texts like Bibeksar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very,
it's a big question. There's a lot.
Very big question. There's a lot to cover. At least over a decade's worth. So that's what we can say. But so I think before I come on to all these different texts, how they relate to Sikhi, my personal view, where I've studied from, who I've learnt from, I think the way I actually got into Sikhi was, I was actually a Munna before.
Yeah.
I had my, hair cut and everything. I had no connection to Sikhi. I came from a, casual Punjabi family. Everyone does. Eating chicken, all that type of stuff. But what happened was, I think, for me, obviously it might sound a bit sad, but it was my dad's kind of passing.
Yeah.
And when you kind of go through a certain pain of life like that, you kind of start to question reality. You start to think, is there anything more to reality? You start to, kind of contemplate upon death. And basically what happened for me was that was a very big turning point for me and my Sikhi. Because I slowly started to go to the Gurudwara more often. And especially the Gyanis there. There was a head Gyani there. He would, really love me, really play with me as a child, everything. And that kind of motivated me to go more into my Sikhi, to dive more into it. So I think, most people probably started off with basic Sikhi or Nanak Naam, this type of stuff. So that's where I actually started off as well, just watching those videos, and doing my own research, Wikipedia, obviously, just going through stuff like that. And slowly, I kind of started to get more into Sikhi. I learnt Punjabi myself, didn't really go to Punjabi school. Whenever I'd go to Punjabi school, the teachers would just spend a whole hour on Ura. And it's I can't learn this way. So I had to self-learn all that type of stuff. Slowly had more of a passion for Sikhi and eventually took Amrit. Even though that whole story of Amrit as well is a very long one, a very tedious one that I had to take Amrit. So much backlash from family, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Why? What was there?
I was 10 years old when I took Amrit.
So what was there anti to it? What, you're too young?
Too young. So I had actually gone to the Gurudwara. I told the Gyani, I was like, can you please write my name down? I want to take Amrit, please. It was Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Gurudwara.
Why were you so convinced at that age?
I think it was just just reading these panktis Jo to prem khilane ka chao sir tar tali gali mil jao it marg pair tarija sir dija kana kija. That if you want to walk on this path of love, then just put your foot now. Don't care about society, don't care about these different things. The Guru will take care of you. And I think that was that conviction, that faith in the Guru that if I take Amrit, if I take this first step, it will, the Guru himself would take care of me. I would no need to worry about anything.
This is a question more out of my own ignorance, but do Non-Dualities traditionally take, as an...
I'm a Nirmala, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Not Non-Duality. Sorry. Do Nirmalas traditionally take Amrit?
So traditionally, it depends. You will find certain sub-branches which do.
Fine.
And some which don't. Because Nirmala is a word which is a very loose word, kind of, in one way.
Okay.
Because, as traditions evolve, you have certain sub-branches which have other traditions, and they make some Nirmalas, they wear white, some wear orange, some wear a gatti. There's 4 different types of gattis.
Okay.
4 different types of gattis.
And for people who don't know better, what is that?
So a gatti is essentially a certain style of cloth which is worn Like you might see the Jathedar, the leader of Hajur Sahib, he wears a gatti as well when he performs.
It's almost like it's almost like a coat type of thing.
He kind of. So what happens is, so there's different types of gattis.
Okay.
So the one my Ustaji wears, the one my teacher wears, he wears just gatti, and then the next one is called a Bajjar gatti.
Okay.
So if you look at Gyani Kulwant Singh Ji, they wear a Bajjar gatti, and that is one cloth which is tied in a certain way, which it covers the whole body.
Oh.
So that's what they wear. And even the story behind that was that when Sikhs would be in war, obviously there weren't, sewing machines that you could just make money. You know? They were in jungles.
The practicalities of it.
The practicalities, exactly.
Yeah.
And what would happen was that they would find these different ways. And that one way of covering your body was to wear a gatti. So even in the Nahangs, if you look at certain images, you'll find certain Nahang Singhs wearing gattis.
Yeah.
But the maryada of the gatti was always that you have to be Behangam. You have to be renunciate to wear it. So it's not...
Okay, again, a question that's more out of my ignorance than anything. We grow up in Western Sikhi household, or just a Sikh household per se, and you're taught this idea that Guru Nanak Dev Ji's concept of mysticism is one of being part of society. Okay, so marry, have a family, kids, all of that, right? And then there's also the whole explanation in terms of then why also we keep case, because cutting your case is almost renouncing society, right? Like Buddhists, how they do it, they go bold and go into the mountains, right? How does then being Bahangam fit in with that? Because aren't you renouncing, because basically, just to kind of boil it down, Gristi Jivan means having a family, having kids. Being Bahangam, you obviously aren't going to have any kids, right?
Exactly.
So I understand it from a spiritual / mystical reasoning, as into why that individual would choose to be Bahangam. But in terms of fitting that within the Sikh worldview, how does that work?
So in one way you could say that, and sometimes people think that Behangamta is just something, or renunciation is just something which is limited to these sadhu sects, to these kind of renunciate kind of wearing orange, doing this type of stuff. But if you look at it, it's been part of the Khalsa as well. Like even you see Nahang Singhs, they wear a farla. And the original tradition of the farla was that somebody who was not married, who was unmarried, he was the only person who could really attain a farla. But then obviously as traditions evolved, it became much more open for people even married people to have a farla, to attain that kind of state, that kind of reputation in the Dalpant. But even Hajur Sahib, if you go Hajur Sahib, the tradition is, for those people that don't know what maryada means, it's a tradition, it's a certain conduct, that the head priest of Hajur Sahib, he has to be Behangam, he cannot marry, he cannot have children, he must be a Bal Brahmachari, he must be somebody who has renounced marriage and worldly life since the start. And I think when it comes to how we can incorporate that with Sikhi, I think Sikhi is something which is like a garden, it's like a rose garden. There's so many different types of flowers. And, every single person, they get into Sikhi with a certain different, viewpoint, with a certain type of, mood or personality. Somebody, when we talk about Behangamta, it's not just about a tradition of being Behangam, of renouncing marriage. There's a certain mental aspect there as well. Like, for example, some Mahapurush, certain saints, they wouldn't get married because, Gurbani gives examples, analogies of the soul bride.
Yes.
The soul bride is married to God.
Yeah.
The Suhagan, the Dohagan, the good bride, the bad bride. And for some people, that is a very much a literal understanding that I am married to God. And if I am married to God, my husband is God. And if I'm marrying somebody else, that's like cheating on my husband. So for some people, it's much more a mental understanding that, it's a mood, it's kind of like a flavor of bhakti, a flavor of devotion, that I'm married to my beloved. I'm married to my husband, Like even Gurbani says, Thakur Ek, there is one husband. Sabai Nar, everybody else is just, his brides, his wives. So some people take that very literally. So there's a bhakti aspect there as well. But then also, it's life living inside of Vidyalaya, living inside these institutions of teaching and learning. It's about it kind of makes it much more easier in one way. But if you look at Sikhi itself, even Bihangams, even people which are unmarried, saints which are unmarried, they still will they will still emphasize the fact that Sikhi is a path where marriage is, kind of, you could say marriage is popularized. And marriage is something which Sikhi says somebody should do, somebody should undergo. That path of Bihangamta is only for a select few. It's not for everybody. It's not for all. Without that, society can't work. Even Bihangams themselves, they have to live off of other people. They have to live off of, society, begging for alms, this type of stuff. But, you could take it in a bhakti kind of way, in a devotional way, of this devotion towards God. But it's also that, being a Bihangam is much more easier than living in society as like in a good Sikh background, being married, having kids. Because, a good Sikh who is married, who is performing bandagi, who's performing devotional worship, or, thinking about this path of realization, God realization, he can meditate in a bazaar full of noise. But a person who's renounced the world, he could be sitting in the Himalayas enjoying meditation, but if he comes in a bazaar, he can't, meditate for even 1 second. So there's pros and cons to both. So it's all about, your personality. And it's not like the Nirmalas or the Nahangs or the Udasis are just for, people which are unmarried. Like, you'll find even sants, you'll find saints which are married. Which, have been married. And, it's just a personal kind of choice, I'd say, of Bihangamata. And even in the past, we find so many examples of Bihangams, be it like, Panj Pyare as well, you find stuff like that. You'll find so many Guru Sikhs in the past which have been unmarried, which just spent their whole life in service to the Guru. So, it's really about your own perspective. And I think sometimes when people take Sikhi and just say it's just for the householder life, it kind of makes Sikhi limited in one way.
Do you think a lot of that, though, is just a hangover from the Singh Sabha and the fact that they so ferociously beat or created or molded or whatever the word is, the Sikhism that the world knows today?
I think partly because of that.
And that also has ostracized groups like the Nirmala and the Udasis. And actually only in the last 20, I wouldn't even say the last 20 years, I'd say the last 10 years have we only seen a kind of change in...
I think people really want to know more. People want to know what the pre-colonial traditions were before this whole kind of...
People question it a lot now, especially the
people have made Sikhi so rigid. People have made Sikhi this black and white path. They forget to understand that there is multiplicity there. There is there's many different ways you can approach Sikhi, and Nirmalas, Udasis are the few sampradas, few traditions which have survived. Historically speaking, there were so many, like even Sindhi Sikhs. They have their own traditions, all this type of stuff. So much.
But it's quite sad as well, because I was reading about how some Udasis had to almost renounce they were Sikh in order to survive at certain points, because Gurdwaras were being taken over and they were being removed. And so as if they declared they were Sikh.
The Nirmalas survived because of this reason. Because when you look at the Akhada, and you'll find, if you go to every single pind, I think nearly every single pind, every other pind has a Nirmala Dera. You'll go there, you'll find these deras of certain sadhus. Obviously, they might not be Nirmal Dera or Nirmal Kutiya, but they're related to sadhus of that same branch. And the reason why many deras survived was because they removed the name Gurdwara. Because the Singh Sabha movement could only really affect those
that had that name.
Gurdwara. But if you're functioning without the name Gurdwara, or you're kind of disassociating yourself from that, they can't really come after you. So that's why many deras, I think Udasis, Nirmalas, they kept the term dera instead of the Gurdwara, because the Gurdwara Act couldn't really apply. And Udasis especially, when you look at them, you'll find that many of them left the beads, that they took out the beads of Guru Granth Sahib. They took out the copies, the recensions of Guru Granth Sahib from their asthans, even though, historically speaking, they were the people which really wrote down these beads, these suroops. But they had to kind of like, in one way, let go of them to actually continue to function. And even now, because of that, I think the Sikh Panth has such a great loss. If you look at the Nirmala Akhada, there's 13 Akhadas, as we know, in India. And they always gather around in the Mahakumbh Mela, which just happened, by the way. And what you'll find there is like the Udasis, especially the Bada Akhada. You've got the Bada Akhada, obviously the big Akhada, and you've got the Naya Akhada. And that whole split in the Udasis was caused because when they were being ostracized, they couldn't associate themselves with Guru Nanak. They couldn't. To continue to survive in India, they couldn't, be, joining themselves with Guru Nanak. So they had taken this small word, Avinashi Muni. Avinashi, Guru Avinashi Khel Rachaya. So in Matra Sahib, in the work of Baba Shri Chand, the first son of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Udasi Samprada, they had to put their Avinashi Gur, Guru Avinashi Khel Rachaya. That the Guru of Baba Shri Chand was Avinashi Muni, was a guru called Avinashi, So they turned that, Avinashi just means the imperishable. And they just took that name for Guru Nanak.
Descriptor,
and made it into a person, made it into a personality. And that's why the Bada Akhada, which believes in Avinashi Muni as the guru of Sri Chand, and you have the Naya Akhada, the new Akhada, which was a split, because they believe that Guru Nanak is the guru of Baba Shri Chand. So, even there, history, it's a very kind of...
it depends what you want to believe.
Depends on what you want to believe, but I've talked to certain scholars, of this, and they all it's common knowledge, there's no mention of Avinashi Muni, till that period of Singh Sabha.
Yeah. So that person obviously doesn't exist, isn't it? Yeah, and it's a descriptor for Guru Nanak Dev Ji. I want to go back to your life, but as you were talking, a question came. A question was jumping around in my brain. So at university, we had to do like a modern Western, not modern, but like a Western philosophy module, and it went through all these various philosophers, right? Spinoza is someone that, if you haven't, go and read his work, but someone else whose work comes up, and again, I'll probably butcher his name and everyone in the comments will be like, oh, this is how you pronounce it. But Nietzsche's whole idea that God is dead, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've been waiting to have this conversation with you because I know the answer you're going to give me is going to blow my brain out. But I would argue the concept of God, in the way that the West configures God, doesn't exist within Sikhi. And the idea that God is dead makes sense within a Sikh paradigm because technically he was never born and never died. So it just is. It just is. It just is. It just exists, right? And it's almost like a void. But even calling it something, like a Karl Ostad goes through saying how you can try and describe all of this, but it's pointless.
Like, one very way that you could use is Satchidanand. God is consciousness, God is bliss, God is existence itself. But then when you remove that on the side, you just say God is this. But remove that God is this. God just is.
Yeah.
And even when you say is, it's like, even that is unable to portray the completely. Understanding of God. And it's like, I find that the way God is described nowadays in this kind of like, this term Sikhism, it really kind of, removes the beauty of God, the beauty of Vaheguru described in Gurbani, the way that the Guru uses so many different analogies to describe that one being, and all these different moods, these flavors of devotion.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes we forget there are different types of bhakti. There isn't just one form of devotion, there's different forms of devotion, there's different flavors of devotion as well. Somebody sees God as a brother. Somebody sees God as a father. Somebody sees God as a mother. Like, to maat pita hum barik tere. Or sometimes the Guru will, describe God as his lover, as his beloved. There's different ras, there's different flavors. There's so many different ways of approaching God in Sikhi, but what's happened is, since we've created this idea of Sikhism, this kind of really like, this one way, ek granth, ek pant. There's one way, there's one pant, there's one granth. But, it's turned very rigid,
Do you think though, and like this is just a hypothetical, but do you also think though that the whole notion that we have of God in like a modern Sikhism era, however you want to describe it, is actually also because as a result of the creation of Sikhism, and like our conversation isn't on the Singh Sabha, so like I don't want to dig too deep into it, but it created a hierarchy, and God only exists in a hierarchy because mysticism, there is no hierarchy in mysticism. Guru Nanak Dev Ji says directly that you can directly connect to the divine. You can not only obtain the same state I'm in, I want you to do that.
I want you to.
Yeah. Whereas most other religions actually say that their profit is you cannot
But this
obtain
is
that
the
state.
thing which makes Sikh unique. Though.
Yes.
Like, whenever somebody asks me, why are you a Sikh? I'm saying it because it's giving me a livid experience. It's saying I can live this experience.
Yeah,
It's not giving me an after-death guarantee.
Yeah.
Like,
Here's a ticket to heaven.
Here's a ticket to heaven.
Yeah.
Or like, and I find, Western religions to be much more transactional. It's like, I do this, I'll get that. It really undermines, like, Sikhi in that way. But Abhijeet, the question was regarding the hierarchy of God.
Yeah.
And I think the way God is portrayed as being somebody in the seventh heaven, it's like, that the Western understanding of God, it's come into the translations of Gurbani.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
Japji Sahib.
Yes.
Okay, let me give you one pankti.
Oh, I love this. Yeah, go for
One
it.
pankti. Ape beej, ape hi kha.
Yep.
Yeah?
And the common translation
So
of that.
that is, you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
You reap what you sow. Okay, that's ape beej. Okay, I plant this, I'll reap that. If you take that whole understanding of ape beej and put it up there, ape beej, you yourself are sowing karma. You yourself have manifested as the universe,
That is a
as
very
all
good point.
human beings, as all of creation.
Yeah.
And you are yourself
Harvesting
sowing
it.
karma, harvesting
Yeah,
karma,
yeah.
and you yourself are sowing it, reaping it. And it's like, when you look at it that way, it turns into something completely different. Another
That's
pankti.
sick. Yeah, I like that.
Kavi Santok Singh,
Yeah.
obviously, I think many people will know him because obviously his
Yeah.
channel has,
Had Jawala doing a lot of podcasts,
a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
podcasts on that. Kavi Santok Singh, when you look at his tika, his translation, his commentary on Japji Sahib, he takes a pankti, Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar.
Yeah.
I know. We read it every day.
Yeah.
Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar, that, that you are this, that you are this Nirankar Vaheguru, and when he talks of that, when he commentates upon that pankti, Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar, he describes it in this way. He says, he refers towards the four great sayings of the Vedas.
Yeah,
He
the
says,
Mahavakyas.
The Mahavakyas, There's Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. There's Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma. That all of this is Brahm.
Yeah.
All of this is God. That consciousness is God. Pragyan, that pragya, that consciousness, that gyan is God. That consciousness is God. All these different type of stuff. And when he refers towards Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar, okay, one way we think about it is we always put it upwards. Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar. Like we're talking to God.
Yeah.
But if we take it, Tu
Inwards.
Sada Salamat Nirankar, it's talking to you as the individual, that you are not different from that. The thing which Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar, not that, Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar, Vaheguru, Tu Sada Salamat. Me.
It's actually.
Tu Sada Salamat Nirankar. Oh my God, the thing which I was looking for my whole life
Is actually
wasn't
here.
different from me. It
Yeah,
was me.
It is me.
It
yeah,
is me.
yeah.
There's no difference. Even when I think it's Bhagavad Vidas, he talks to God. He says, Tohi mohi, you, me, I, you. Tohi mohi, mohi tohi antar kaisa. What is the difference?
Okay, I'm going to be devil's advocate here, and I'm going to give you a practical example which I have wrestled with, and I'm sure a lot of people have hypothetically wrestled with a similar analogy, right? So central to this concept is that I, and when I say I mean the I as in the ego,
yeah.
and the bit behind the ego and God are the same.
God is the
Okay,
same.
and technically the ego is also part of God, but it's the bit that actually kind of blurs your vision of
There's your vision
of
of
your
God,
existence.
of your
right?
existence. Yeah.
Now, there are a load of maniacs and murderers and people across the globe through history who are convinced they are God and then do heinous, impossibly atrocious acts, right?
Yeah.
And so that creates a practical, doesn't create a problem, but it creates almost like a practical issue with, and I know in terms of Sikhi, it's not understanding you are God, it's actually understanding you are God in terms of like, you don't...
Because when you say I am God, who is the I? Who is the I? Is it the body? Is it the mind? What is it? Who are you saying is God?
Thing that is observing. I wouldn't even call it a soul.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even the soul is something which is, really ruined by
Yeah.
Western Abrahamic philosophy.
I can point at it, but I don't want to label it. If that
I don't want to label it. And I understand where you're coming from. And I think that idea comes when you relate the I with the body, with the mind, with a sense of being. But I think when you say I am God, it's like, the way that Sikhi proposes, the way I see Sikhi proposes, this understanding of coming to this realization, is that, okay, first, you're sitting there, you're saying tu hi, tu hi, tu hi. You're chanting you, you. You're stuck in the remembrance of God. You're drowning the ego in God. When you're chanting Vaheguru, 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 like Vahe, when you think of the word Vahe, it's this being wonderstruck, this sense of Vismad. And when you're saying Vaheguru, 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 at a certain point you come to the realization that that the whole world becomes my beloved, that there is nothing other than my beloved. You see the whole world as God. Like, Gurbani gives a very beautiful, pangati, a very beautiful verse. It says that Jo bolet hai mirgameen pankheru, that whatever the animals, the birds, the fishes sing of, so bin hari japat, so bin har japat hai nahi hor. That you come to this realization that when you wake up in the morning, you see the birds chirping, the birds singing, and you see, fishes like, bubbling in the water, you come to this realization that all of them are just talking of the same one. Like, even in Jab Sahib we read, that Tua Sarbanam Katha Kavan Karmanam Baranat Sumat. The Guru says, all names, all sounds, Tua Sarbanam, all names, all names are of yours. All sounds are you. But Katha Kavan Karmanam. But I am only going to talk of those names which are related to a certain action. When you say Gobind, for example, we read this, Hey Gobind, Hey Gopal, we hear this all the time. Or we read of Hari, Har, Hana. Har is a word coming again and again and again in Gurbani. They're names which are related to a certain action. When you say Gobind, the Go means the earth. Bind means to protect, the protector of the earth. The Gopal, the one who nourishes, Jo Paldaya, a person who nourishes the earth, who nourishes all of mankind. Or Dayal, the compassionate. These words have a certain meaning in them. Hana? And you come to this realization, chanting these names, that if all of this is God, then I am not different from that same being. If all of this is God, if everything I see, everything which exists, that existence itself is God, you come to the realization, I am not different from that. And that's the path that Gurbani proposes, that drowning the ego. And I think there's a very beautiful pangati, Homme dir garog hai, daru piyes mahe. When we say I am God, there's two ways of looking at it. You could say it with ego.
Yes.
Yeah, you can relate the ego with the God. Yeah, I am that. Yeah. Yeah, I, Arjun saying, I am God. Yeah, baal binga karke dikhao. Try and do whatever you want to me. I'm not going to move. But there's another way of looking at it, that when you say I am God, you have to understand who is the I. Like, are you relating it to the body, relating it to the mind? I am God is more of an experience than just chanting I am God, I am God. You won't become God by just saying I am God. It's like, then if somebody slaps in your face, like, you shouldn't start crying. If somebody, like, it punches you, you shouldn't start crying. But the thing is, it's about that understanding of what you're relating the I with. Who is God? Who are you saying is God? And it's much more of a realization, I'd say, in Gurbani. Even when you come to Vedanta, because if you look at it, Vedanta is something which proposes this idea of, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. Even the verse, Tattvamasi, because if you look at Hindu philosophy, there's not just one understanding, there's hundreds of different understandings. I'll just give you an example.
And variations.
Here. You might have heard of Tattvamasi.
Yeah.
You are that.
Yes.
Tattvamasi. You are that. And the whole verse is Sa Atma Tattvamasi. And those which know Sanskrit, they'll kind of know Sa Atma, that you as the Atma are that. But another philosopher, Madhvacharya, the dualistic philosopher, he says Sa Atma Atattvamasi. Because in Sanskrit, you can split up words on sandhi. So for example, A and A make a A.
Okay.
A A and a also make a A.
Oh, okay.
And a A also make a A.
Safe.
Yeah,
making it easy, right?
So Atma Atat.
Okay.
So he's turned that into being Sa Atma Atattvamasi. That you are not that. So there's many different ways of understanding even that Vedantic aspect, but I think I've probably drifted a little bit away from
that's fine.
the conversation.
I enjoyed this, man. I enjoyed this.
But, coming back to your question of, like, this I am God and, like, being devil's advocate, how does that relate to that? Okay, one is that the individual and God aren't different. The second is the seen world is illusory.
Yes.
That whatever you're seeing, not that what you're seeing is entirely illusory, but it's the name and the form which is illusory.
Okay.
The name and the form.
Yes.
Like, for example, this table right in front of us. What are we seeing? We're seeing a table.
Yeah.
But somebody who's self-realized, he sees that's not a table, that's wood. You know? When we see the ocean, okay, a very brief example, and it shows you how beautiful, you know, Sikhi is,
Yeah, yeah.
how beautifully we can understand God.
Yeah.
And that is, okay, we go there, say there's three of us.
Yeah,
ठीक
yeah.
है? So you go there, you see there's ocean and there's waves.
Mm-hmm.
I might say the waves are just part of the ocean. You know, there is only God. But then somebody might say, nor the waves exist, nor the ocean. That's only water. It's only H2O. you know?
Yeah.
So none of those perspectives are wrong.
No, they're all a different
They're
angle.
all just different angles of
Yeah,
seeing.
yeah, different
We're
perspectives.
seeing in a perspective of ignorance. We see a table.
Yeah.
I see, you know, ramblings of a Sikh right there. I know.
Touche.
And you see Arjun Singh here.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
But a person who's self-realized by the path of Gurbani, Sab Gobind hai, everything is Gobind, everything is God. For him, there is only God. We see this table, he sees wood.
Yeah.
We see this glass, he sees sand.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
We see, like, you know, the same thing there. And it's just a different way of understanding. And what I find is the way that Sikhi is being taught, it's all being put to be the external. Everything is based upon the external. Nobody talks about philosophy, about, you know, non-duality, which
Yeah.
Gurbani talks about. Nobody talks about that.
Well, surely the start of all of Sikhi is non-duality
It's
with
ik,
ik, right?
and God.
Yeah.
Even that, it turns into God is one.
Yeah,
There is no is.
There's no God in the middle of that.
There's no God in the middle of
there's
that.
no God there.
And nor is there any is
No.
between ik and Oankar.
No.
It's like Oankar and one.
Yeah,
One
the
Oankar.
Oankar and the one are one and the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even Oankar, just looking at that word, when you put it as being God, you really remove the complexity, the beauty of Oankar. Oankar is made up of four things. Akar, Okar, Makar, these three sounds when they get together. And you can look at it in so many different ways. You can look at it to be different states of consciousness. Like, for example, the waking, the dream, and the deep sleep. And then the observer inside of that, you know, the fourth, the Oankar, you know, the Kar there, the one which is observing. So, you know, like, you know, there's even a very beautiful, famous story. I might be going off topic, but still, I really want to get into this non-duality part. And that is, like, for example, there's a story of a king, Raja Janak. Like, even Gurbani talks about it, that once there was a king who slept on his throne. And in his dream, he became a beggar. So basically, he became a beggar in his dream. He was kicked out of his kingdom. A new king came. He took over. And he's, you know, begging and begging. He leaves his kingdom. He's kicked out. Nobody in his kingdom is even willing to give him alms to eat. Yeah. So he's kicked out, and he sees there's a bhandara. There's some langar. Like, you know, there's probably some, like, you know, nice fellows there just sitting there doing langar, you know, giving out food. And he's sitting in the queue, standing in the queue, like waiting for his line. And by the time he gets there, it's run out.
Yeah.
And then they have like some, I think it was keed.
Yeah,
And then some keed. And they put that in a bowl for him. They said, "Qul la ilaha illallah." And I think it was a falcon coming above, you know. And as it was coming above, there was a snake, you know, in its peak. And a few droplets of poison fell into that keed. And he was like, "Oh my God, I can't even eat this now."
Yeah.
And in so much agony, so much pain, the story goes, he woke up. When he's woken up, you know, everyone's saying, like, "What's going on with you? I know. What's happening?" And he's like, was that real or is this real? Because as long as I was in that dream, the dream appeared to be real.
Yeah.
And now I'm in this waking, the waking appears to be real. What is real? Was that real or is this real? Is that real or is this real? He's like, everybody's thinking the king's gone mental. Yeah. And what happens is that, seeing that there was a sadhu, his name was Ashtavakkar, and even his story is a bit long, but essentially he had 8 bends in his body, you know, he was a bit disabled. And he came to the king, and obviously he was a self-realized person, he knew what was going on in the head of the king. And he went there, he said, "Na o sach, na e sach." Nor was this real, nor was the waking real, nor is the waking real, nor was the dream real. But who is real? Tu sach.
Yeah.
You are real. You are the reality which you are asking for. Why? Because the very beautiful trait of reality is that reality doesn't change. If something is reality,
truth
it's set
never
in stone.
changes.
Truth never
Truth
changes.
doesn't change. Yes.
So the dream world, it was changing. What you were wearing, the body, the
Yes.
form,
Yeah.
everything was changing. The people surrounding you was changing. Your understanding of yourself, the ego was changing. In the waking, in the dream, in the waking, you're a king. In the dream, you're a beggar. But who is the thing? What is the thing which isn't changing? The observer, the one who's seeing all of that. He isn't changing. So you are that reality. So, even there, Uankar, just look at that. Just one simple story to just explain one small aspect, one small understanding of Uankar. You've got Sato, Rajo, Tamo, the three modes of Maya, three modes of duality of creation, and the observer which is observing all of that. It's so complex, it's so deep. Ikko and God. If you asked me, Hannah, to talk about Ikko and God, we could do a whole podcast on Ikko and God.
We might have to do that. Because I definitely would enjoy it.
But that's the thing though. Gurbani's so complex, but we've made it so small. And this, this Western understanding of God has limited Sikhi so much. Forget about this talk of non-duality. Even this understanding of God being able to take form. The Gurus being a manifestation of God. Guru Nanak being the golden avatar of Kali Yuga. People can't accept that. People are like, how can God take form? Because we've been conditioned so much by this Western understanding that God is this, God has to fit this kind of, these kind of characteristics, this framework. We're unable to kind of look beyond that, and even certain examples of Gurbani, I think, people can't understand certain analogies, people aren't willing to accept. And I think that's also a reason why people aren't able to understand or accept even Dasambani. Because Dasambani just gets so real with you. It'll talk about the reality of the world, talk about, there's a Pangati that all the suffering, all the bad in the world is also God. Of course. That all the bad in this world is you. All the good in the world is you. It's I remember I was with a Guru Sikh doing vichar on that, and it's just crazy the way Guru Gobind Singh describes the world. He's like, all the dukh in this world, all the pain, all the tyrants of this world are also you. That's a realization of reality which isn't kind of clouded by this like these material emotions of
or
good
duality
or bad duality. Good and bad exist in duality.
Of course.
Moral and immoral exist in duality.
But you pop out of
from
that,
the supreme avastha, from the supreme state, there is only God. There is no good, there is no bad, there is no sin, there is no merit. But the thing with Sikhi is, this is why I do not go into non-dualism, neo-Sikhi, neo-spirituality, where it becomes, everything is God, you don't need to care about that, there is no good, there is no bad, you can go smoking, you can do that, you can do this. The thing is, as long as you're within the dream, you still have to act as a dreamer. You still have to live in that world,
That's a good point.
And the realization Gurbani is talking about isn't a realization meant to be merely read or comprehended. It's an experience. It's not something you say, I am God, and there is no good, there is no bad.
You actually have to actualize it. It's not about thinking about it.
And it's that, let me give you an example. Today, I think, obviously, at a certain point, the sun sets, the sun rises. Okay, we see a sun setting, we see a sun rising. But in reality, the sun doesn't set, the sun doesn't rise. But now, from this perspective, if I'm going to be out there at 7:30, today, I'm going to be looking there, I'm going to say the sun is setting. I'm going to say the sun is rising. And from my perspective, that is completely true. You can't say the sun isn't setting.
No, true.
So now when the sun's going to set at 7:33 or 7:30, you're not going to be saying that the sun isn't setting or the sun isn't rising, or dawn. You're not going to remove these terms of dawn from out of your vocabulary. You're not going to remove these terms of Amritvila out of your vocabulary. It's that from our perspective, from this reality, there's layers to reality. People think reality is just black and white. There are layers to reality. And when you come to that understanding, you realize how vast, how beautiful Guru Sikhi is. And you realize that there are so many levels to reality. And when you come to that understanding that for me, the sun is setting, For me, the sun is rising. But from the absolute perspective, the sun isn't rising. The sun isn't setting. The sun is just right there. We're orbiting around the earth.
But when you get to that
when
absolute, that's when then it's different, right?
That's when it's different.
You can't assume the absolute when you're not there. Yeah, no,
You
definitely.
can't. I think
I have got so many questions, and
we have to go through them.
we are very quickly running out of time.
Quickly running out of time, yeah.
So obviously you've spoken about your relationship between personal experience and spiritual understanding, and that's obviously an important one, and it brings us nicely to the format of the Bibeksar. As we've discussed already, it's not the only text within the Sikh pantheon of scripture that is written in this question-answer format. As we've said, a lot of people probably are more familiar with Bhai Mani Singh's work, which again uses a similar format. So as we've mentioned, Bibeksar is written in the question-answer format, again similar to Bhai Mani Singh's work. Now, this format, I'm going to butcher what its term in Sanskrit, Prashnotri?
Prashnotri, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the term for the format, and it's uniquely to facilitate the seeker's journey. Now, it was interesting for me to dig my teeth into Bibeksar because, again, it made me go and explore this whole question-answer format and its significance. Why is this format picked? Like, it seems like I have to admit, it seems like a very modern format for being used so long ago, if that makes sense.
You know, I think the way
because it's almost like a podcast that's been written down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's like exactly as a podcast.
Someone's like, yo, I have all of these questions, and then they've asked someone who knows better. So in Bhai Mani Singh's case, it's argued that there are Singh's questions with Gobind Singh Ji,
and
Bhai Mani Singh writes it down.
Even like Bhai Nandlal's conversations with Gobind Singh.
Yeah.
And the thing there is that I think a very big thing is that Sikhi is something that is personal. Nowadays, Sikhi is being made so, kind of so different, so like, it's like it's become Abrahamic in one sense, obviously, like in the sense that God is somebody far, God is something like, if you look at the Quran, if you look at the Bible, it's always something very broad. It's, aimed towards a certain population, a certain community. Like even the Bible itself, like, talking about all these different stories, it's aimed towards, a set group of people, or a bunch of people. But what you find with Gurbani is something so personal. Gurbani is not talking to you on a level that you're a person, part of a populace. Part of a population, sorry. But the thing is, Gurbani is talking to you as an individual being. Gurbani is like, even Japji Sahib. Japji Sahib is a conversation, it's a dialogue between Guru Nanak and the Siddhs.
Yes.
Look at Akal Ustat, Ek Samay, Sri Atma. At one point, the Atma goes, and it starts asking questions to, God. So the individual is talking to God on a personal level. And Gurbani is very personal. Even recently, I was in Southall doing the Slok Mahla Nava course. I was helping out there. And when you look at the Bani, Kaho Nanak Har Bhaj Mana, it's talking to the mind. It's not talking to the body. It's not talking to a bunch of people. It's talking to the mind. And when you look at the Uttanaka, the context of that Bani, Guru Tegh Bahadur is in Delhi. The Sangat of Anandpur, they're missing Guru Tegh Bahadur. They're in this sense of Vairag. And what Guru Tegh Bahadur does is, to kind of make them, kind of become a bit detached. He writes this Bani down and he sends it to them. But when he's writing the Bani, he's not writing it as if he's talking to a bunch of people. He's writing it to every single Gursikh as a personal dialogue. That Kaho Nanak Har Bhaj Mana, it's talking to the mind. It's talking to you personally. Gurbani isn't talking to a group of people. Obviously, you can take that, personal understanding. You can take that personal kind of conversation with the Guru and make it something much more broader. You can use Gurbani in different ways, in different applications. But the thing is that Gurbani is meant to be personal. And even Sikhi and Sikh literature is meant to be personal. So I think Prashnotri is something very important because, I think nowadays Sikhs have forgotten to question. Hana? That's a very big problem. We've forgotten that Sikhi is based on curiosity. Give us a jara hoiya. How do I become one with the truth? How do I realize the truth? Give a kuda tutta pal. How do I break this wall of falsehood, this wall of illusion to realize what is truly real? It's like Gurbani is something which is something meant to be for the curious. It's meant to be there to stimulate you, to kind of question, to ask more. If Japji Sahib, the first Bani of Guru Granth Sahib, is a question and answer dialogue, then how are we removing questioning from Sikhi?
It's the basis of it. The introduction to this in the introduction to Santida Singh Nirmala's translation and commentary, noting his exploration of mystical traditions. So this is a direct quote. Mystical traditions descending from the Vedantic to the Guru's times, and the inclusion, again, a direct quote, of scriptural verses from Gurbani, and at some places one can also glimpse elements of Vedanta. How does Bibeksar navigate the relationship between Sikh philosophy and Vedantic thought, particularly the Vedanta of the Gurus rather than that of Sankara, and what does this offer the reader? In other words, I'm asking you to differentiate between the way Sikhi views Vedanta and the way ancient Indic philosophy would have viewed Vedanta.
It's a question which is a very hard question actually, but it's a question which you can talk on for ages. But I'll try to do my best.
Because in the commentary,
biblical.
The what is it? The introduction does quite a good job of it, and I don't want to repeat that.
No,
but
obviously, Hanji.
I'd like you
definitely.
to.
I think that when it comes towards Vedanta. So first of all, for those which don't know what Vedanta is, I think you've had Kamalpreet Singh Pardesi, you've had a few which have talked about Vedanta recently, and I think Kamalpreet Singh Pardesi is doing a great job.
He's so good at the work he does. Man. It's amazing.
And always, I think helping out me as well. I think I think when it comes towards the relationship between Shankara's Vedanta and the Guru's Vedanta, we have to understand what Vedanta means.
Yeah.
The word Ved comes from the word vid, the verb vid, which means to know.
Okay.
So Ved itself means knowledge. So,
but wouldn't a lot of people argue though that Ved is
obviously? I'll come
like,
to that meaning as well.
Yeah, it's like.
But the first, if we just take it literally, forgetting about the context, the cultural context behind that word,
Fair.
or or the terms or the philosophies associated to that word, to that term, just taking it from a literal aspect. Because I think when I use the word Guru's Vedanta, people will kind of think I'm just trying to relate it to Shankara's philosophy. But
isn't Vedanta just because in the commentary he makes a great distinction between
Hanji.
I think it's Meitei's Vedanta, which is a very particular school of Vedanta, and Vedanta in terms of a term for non-dualism, which Sikhi is deeply entrenched in.
No, exactly. So I think the way you could see it is that with Shankara's Vedanta, Shankara proposes this idea of non-duality. He proposes all of that. He proposes this idea of you are that, I am God, all that type of stuff. But there are certain things, part of that tradition, which you could say kind of, which are limitations, which the Guru goes beyond.
Yeah, completely.
Like for example, Shankara's Vedanta puts a very big, puts a very big place for renunciation. That renouncing the world, having the sense of Vairag, and leaving the world, leaving family life, leaving all of that, to essentially kind of put your whole life for the quest of the truth. That's one very big part of Shankara's, Vedanta, or at least the tradition of Vedanta, which was born from Shankara. And what you find with that is, Sikhi is promoting this idea that you can come to these realizations whilst living in a householder's life. And the other thing is that when you look at Vedanta in that aspect of Shankara's Vedanta, or traditional Indian, like Vedanta, it's related to the caste system as well.
Yeah.
Like for example, if you want to be a Shankaracharya, if you want to be the head authority of Vedanta, you can never do so if you're not a Brahmin. So.
Oh, that's right. My granddad's Brahmin.
Obviously, a granddad's Brahmin, so you could put a case
on my
down.
mom's side, yeah.
So you could put a case, but most people they can't.
I'm not pure Brahmin though, innit? Right?
Pure Brahmin. So the thing there is that what happens is that because of those norms or certain cultural kind of norms of that time as well, you're unable to kind of like maneuver. Like Sikhi makes it very open. Sikhi makes it very accessible.
There are no hierarchies.
No hierarchies.
There's no hierarchies.
You can be a Brahmin, you can be a Shudra, you can be a Jat, or whatever you want to be, and you can attain that. So that's one very big thing. The other one is regarding the path to self-realization. So Vedanta, you'll find a lot of Vedantins, and with them is they will always stress, just say that I am God, and you just contemplate upon that. You are God, and you'll become liberated. People say that. You're like, there's nothing more you need to do. Just say, oh, I'm God, I'm God, I'm God. Aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi, aham brahmasmi. You just say that, and you're done. You've got nothing else to do. You're realized. If you just say, I am God, you're realized.
Sounds too simple.
It sounds too simple.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's not traditional Vedanta. That's Neo-Vedanta in one way. But that understanding has crept into Vedanta quite a lot. And the other thing is that it stresses a lot upon this idea that I am God. I am God, that it encourages the seeker to say, I am God. And Sikhi's not against that, but I'll come into Sikhi's understanding soon.
Please.
So that is one.
Okay.
That is one difference. If you look at Gurbani never stresses the fact that you need to kind of say to people, I am God, or have to preach this fact that I am
Doesn't
God.
Sikhi stress you need to break your ego in order to see
To
the
see
God?
that, exactly.
Yeah.
So the problem with Vedanta is that people which aren't qualified for Vedanta, if you look at the actual qualification to be to actually do Vedantic sadhana, to do Vedantic practice, you have to first have the diksha. If I come to you, I pour ice cold water on you, you should have zero reaction. That's the diksha.
Oh man, okay.
Being able to endure like the pains of the world, like cold, heat, being able to endure
So Guru Arjan Dev Ji
pain and
was
pleasure.
Ultimate one of them.
Ultimate one of them.
Yeah.
So then you've got even this idea of like, you have to be at a very high stage of spirituality. You have to have cleansed the mind by the means of devotion and by the means of ritual to be able to even qualify for Vedantic practice.
Mad, okay.
So some people, so that's one big thing as well. Vedanta is kind of for a niche of people. Vedanta is something which is kind of, maybe not intended to, but it's become, it was a niche for a certain group of people. Like, people with a certain level of spiritual practice, a level of spiritual state. With Gurbani makes it very free. Gurbani says that, look, you can, be of any caste, you can be of any spiritual understanding, any part of that kind of path to self-realization. You can be of any single part, any single, kind of, juncture in your spiritual journey, and you can follow Guru Sikhi. There's no kind of, qualifications there to walk on the path of Guru Sikhi. So that is one very big thing as well. That Sikhi is much more open, it's much more accessible. And Sikhi stresses the idea of coming to self-realization by the means of devotion, by coupling devotion with knowledge, coupling devotion with the path of knowledge. Because Shankara's path, Vedanta's path, is one of knowledge. That you sit there and you reflect, I am that. Who is the I? Who is that? You reflect upon those different things. And one way of self-realization in Vedanta is to realize what you are not.
Oh, like niti.
Naiti.
Yeah.
That, like, there's an example, there's 10 people, they go out, they cross a river, they're sent by their guru to go and grab something, and they go out there, they cross the river, and they start counting each other for safe measure. So they say 1, 2, there's 10 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, where's the 10th? So they try and find the 10th. And Vedanta says, go and eliminate, that which isn't the 10th. So the first can't be the 10th, the second can't be the 10th. So going like that, eliminating every single person, you come to the realization, I am the 10th man. So that's their path.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Need. But with Gurbani, it's a little bit different. Gurbani is, because with Vedanta, there's always a chance that you can kind of relate the I with the ego. The I am that. And without having that spiritual base of devotion, without having a purified mind, a purified vessel for that knowledge, you can actually, essentially, confuse yourself with the ego as being God.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's a very risky path in some ways. What Gurbani is saying, rather than doing that, by the path of bhakti, by the path of devotion, when you drown yourself so much in devotion, in love for God, and everything becomes your beloved, you come to the realization that I am no different from my beloved. You drown the ego in that ocean of bhakti, in that ocean of love, which is Vaheguru. That's the way I would say Sikhi, separates, on that path. And also, the Maryada.
Yeah.
Forgetting about philosophy, one very big thing is the way you dress, the way you eat, the way you do things. And we can obviously say that that's very different, But yeah, so Vedanta and Guru Sikhi, there's many different similarities. And obviously, in certain parts, Sikhi does differ. Because,
if you were to say the biggest difference between Sikhi and Vedanta, what would that be?
I would say the biggest difference is that Sikhi emphasizes devotion.
And that's the biggest difference between Sikh Vedanta and what we would class as like classical Indic Vedanta.
Yeah, it's much more accessible. That's one.
Yeah.
And the biggest difference I would say is on a philosophical terms rather than like practicality. If you just look at it philosophically, The biggest thing is Sikhi is something which is much more open,
Yeah.
and Sikhi is something which is much more stressing devotion as a means to God, duality as a mean to cut duality and attain non-duality.
Yeah.
And even for that,
Yes.
for example, like Shankara's path, you could say, is just if you get a thorn stuck in your foot, you just take some tweezers and just remove that thorn. But Sikhi is like you get a thorn in your foot, but you remove that same thorn using another thorn. Because what is bhakti? What is devotion? What is love for God? Love only happens in a duality. When there is somebody who is being loved, yeah. So there's one person which loves somebody. Yeah, there's a lover and there's a beloved. Yeah?
Touche.
That's a duality there.
Yes.
There's a lover, there's
you
a
got
beloved.
Me there. Yeah, you got me there.
But what happens is that Gurbani is saying use duality to cut duality. You're using that thorn stuck in your to remove the thorn stuck in your foot. You're using another thorn. So that's what Sikhi becomes. That Sikhi is cutting duality using duality.
Yeah.
By the means of Homme Dira Gurog hai. Homme is the thorn.
Yeah.
But you can remove Homme using another thorn.
Yeah. Well, you have to use your ego to some
Have
degree.
to use to some degree to destroy ego.
Yes.
So the mind itself is even in Vedanta. There's a very beautiful verse. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. The mind alone is the reason, is the sole cause of both liberation and bondage. When you take yourself to be separate from God, you become in bondage.
Yeah.
When you take yourself to be one with God, you become
You're liberated.
one. And also in bhakti, sometimes if you look at the path of devotion, there's this thing called viraha bhakti.
Yeah.
You probably, obviously you know about it.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
That this bhakti in the flavor, in the mood of separation. So what is that it's like, for example, that you love God and the yearning to become one with God is so flavorful that even that becomes bhakti. And usually a very good example of this is the gopis and Krishna. When Krishna leaves Vrindavan, he goes to Dwarka. When he reaches Dwarka, the gopis, they're missing Krishna so much that every single second being away from Krishna becomes like 1,000,000 years for them. They can't bear it.
Yeah.
And then Krishna sends Uddhav. He sends his disciple Uddhav to go there and tell the gopis, tell them that this message of non-duality, that I'm not different from you. But they're like, no, we don't want that. We want to be with you.
Yeah.
They're rejecting Uddhav. They're saying, go away, piss off. And it's like, that's where bhakti becomes much more flavorful for some people.
Yeah.
And that's where Sikhi kind of differs in some ways.
No, touche. The text mentions that through the Guru's kindness or grace or kirpa, as I guess we would say, doubts are removed. Considering the nature of spiritual inquiry often involves grappling with uncertainty. What does Bibeksar suggest about the interplay between the seeker's questions and the Guru's grace in resolving these doubts and fostering understanding? So in other words, Sikh is very clear in this, which actually nothing happens without Guru's kirpa, Guru's grace, especially in this path to actualization, right? And you could be doing bhakti for Jugga and nothing happens. You could do bhakti for 10 seconds and Maharaj goes, here you go, right? Who knows?
Who knows?
How does that relationship work then? Or how does Bibeksar understand that relationship? Because on one hand, with this type of question answer format, we're saying the curious mind, the curious seeker, disciple is what we want. We want that inquiry so that you can burn layers of your ego, so to speak, and kind of intellectualize it. But then on the other hand, we're actually saying none of this is going to have any impact unless there's kirpa.
So this is the thing though, it's there's a very famous Pankti, Ram Maya Sat Gurdaya Sadhusang Jabahue. The grace of Ram, grace of the Guru, and when there is a sadhu sangat. Tab prani janna kachu, then you learn something, then you're able to realize without that, you're still stuck in Maya. And the thing is, when it comes towards the purpose of the Sadguru, and with the Guru, there's different ways of understanding. Because when we think of the Guru, what do we think of? Guru Granth Sahib Ji. We think of our 10 Gurus. But there's also another way of looking at the Guru. In the Sampradayic understanding, at least in the Nirmala Sampradaya, in the Sampradayic, in the traditional understanding, the orthodox understanding, the Guru isn't just a teacher.
No.
Guru Granth Sahib Ji isn't just a teacher. They are the deity of worship. For the Nirmala Sampradaya, it's the Isht, is the one which they look up to, which they worship as
Yeah.
God. So that is also the guru. But the guru also becomes the Vidya Guru, the teacher.
Yeah.
The teacher who teaches you, who guides you. Because Gurbani, like, sometimes we say that Gurbani is the only guru we need. We don't need to, ever look for a teacher to understand
Yeah.
Gurbani. But the thing is, Gurbani, still, you have to understand Gurbani by a certain means. Gurbani was written in Ladivar. It was written without,
Yes, without
spaces.
separation.
Gurbani itself is a text. Back then, nobody really was, literate. Back in those days, it was very hard to find people that were literate. So
And also just access to copies of the beads would have been difficult
access
due
as well.
to technology.
I think one very big thing, which was a part of the pre-colonial Sikh traditions, was the aspect of a Vidya Guru, was the aspect of somebody who teaches you, the meanings of Gurbani, who teaches you the meanings of this, of meanings of that, the context of certain pangatis, which
teachers,
guides you
basically.
in self-realization. Even the word Vaheguru, I'll show you. Even the word Vaheguru is a word which essentially doesn't come up many times in Gurbani. But our whole understanding of Sikhi is based on this one word, Vaheguru. Whenever we meet somebody, we say, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And a very big reason is that Sikhi is something meant to be a lived tradition. It's meant to be, it's not that there's just Guru Granth Sahib Ji and that's the only source of self-realization. It's that Guru Granth Sahib Ji is there, but to understand Guru Granth Sahib Ji, but to completely appreciate Guru Granth Sahib Ji, you still need to have a teacher who teaches you, who guides you. And even when you get initiated into Sikhi, you get initiated by the means of the Panj Pyare. When you take Amrit, for example, in the case of the Khalsa, you get initiated by the Panj Pyare and they give you the Vaheguru mantra. And I found certain Sampradas, even the Namtaris, if you look at them, the Namtaris actually, they take the Gur mantra, they take Vaheguru to be a word, to be their Gur mantra. They take it to be the mantra given by their Guru. So they keep it sacred, they keep it secret. They don't actually greet everybody with Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh all the time. Why? Because they see the word Vaheguru is actually being their Gur mantra, being a secret mantra whispered by the Guru, given by the Guru. So I think that aspect of the lived tradition that you have a Guru, you have a teacher who guides you in meditation. Like, for example, how do I meditate? Even that was something which I had, because Gurbani just talks about Naam, but then how do I meditate upon Naam? How do I use Naam? And you really realize that when you come to somebody, a teacher, a master, and there's many different ways. Like, there's one way where you concentrate and you actually imagine the word Vaheguru. So once you're chanting Vaheguru, you're imagining how the word Vaheguru is written down. So you're trying to imagine that in your mind. Vavenu kanna, hahenu sihari, the Vaheguru. So when you're chanting, and when you're meditating upon the characters of Vaheguru. Or you could even, there was one method given to me by my Ustad. There's so many different methods. Obviously, certain methods which you can't really disclose all the time. Because they're meant to be gained. They're meant to be understood from somebody who is qualified. So there's always this tradition. But at the end of the day, it's not that the Ustad is merely there to guide you, to merely help you out here and there.
They're just further down the path.
But the person who actually grants you mukti is Guru Granth Sahib Ji. The greatest of all is Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Even in the Sampradas, the greatest is Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Nobody surpasses that. Nobody is greater than that. But it's just that they help us out. It's like a guide kind of.
They're just further down the system, isn't it? Yeah.
No, exactly. It's like those Vidya Gurus are just helping us to understand what the actual Guru was saying. Because obviously, people like me, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, and for me to understand something like Gurbani, it's impossible without having some guidance. Be it books, be it we've got a great collection of books by Rambling Spaji, be it books, be it teachers, be it Gursikhs, Sangat, they teach you a lot, and they're meant to guide us. But no, definitely.
Well, it says in the text that the evidence of a Sikha is described as meditation, which will not happen with continuous recitation of words. And again, that's a direct quote. How does the Vivek Pradipika, and again, I probably butchered the pronunciation, differentiate between, as you were saying earlier, mere verbal repetition and the deeper introspective practice of meditation? And what qualities divine define even genuine meditative engagement according to the text. So what is, because similarly to yourself, the text says, and anyone who's read it can obviously agree with this, that just saying words as you were earlier repeating isn't going to make a difference. Like I could sit here and say Coca-Cola forever. It doesn't mean I'm going to become a can of Coke, right?
Exactly.
What is then the methods? What are those deeper introspective practices that do qualify for meditation?
Meditation. Very good question. I think even in my katha, I've highlighted many times that, by merely chanting like a parrot, Vaheguru, 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 you're not going to get anywhere.
No.
Because even Kabir says, Kabir Ram, Ram Karta, Sab Jag Fir Hai. The whole world is saying Ram, Ram. If you go India, especially like, Hindu sellers, like, you go there, you go to the shops, you get something that'll be Ram, Ram Ji, Their way of greeting is Ram, Ram, But they're saying Ram, Ram all day. But they haven't come to that realization of Ram Ram.
Isn't there a Pankti, though, I can't remember the exact one or who it's written by, but if it says something along the lines of like, if it was just me recitation, then like all the animals would have attained mukti.
Exactly. Gurmani gives many examples like that. But the thing is, it's about chanting, being consciously aware of what you're saying, of what you're chanting, of who you're meditating upon.
Yeah.
And one very beautiful way that Gurbani gives us to kind of meditate upon God is that take the characteristics of God. So there's two types of characteristics. There are one characteristics which are the nature of God himself. And the second are those which are kind of a bit more temporary. They're characteristics which are related to a certain thing that God does. And like, for example, that is called Sarupa Lakshan and Tatastha Lakshan. So Sarupa Lakshan is like, your nature itself, what defines you, Not a characteristic, but it's much more of what defines you. And an example to kind of illustrate this is like, say, if I wanted to come, to Rambling Spudgy's house, I might ask somebody, I might say, okay, I need to get to this address, tell me how I get there. So I might go there, he might tell me, look, there's a bird sitting on that house, go to that house. That is where Rambling Spudgy lives. Yeah? So I'm going to go there, and at the time I get to that house, the bird's going to fly off. By the time I get there, the bird's not going to be there. But that guided me there. That helped me to get there. So that is the Tatastha Lakshan. So those are those characteristics.
To put it into like an analogy, would it be, and again, or maybe walking on eggshells here, but for argument's sake, you have like the multiplicity of gods within the Hindu or the Indic pantheon, right? You could argue that they are all like, what's the word? Almost like subtle, small examples of God at a point, whereas actually they are not the defining characteristics of what a God Purak is.
No, exactly. Even like, when you use the word Gobind.
Yeah.
Gobind, the one who protects the earth. Or you use the word Dayal, compassionate. God can only be compassionate if there is somebody who's being compassionate towards. There can only be a protector of the earth if there is an earth.
But there can also only be a protector of the earth if there is something to protect it from. So there has to be a duality.
Has to be a duality.
Yeah.
So that duality kind of guides you there. That kind of, those words like Gobind, Gopal, they guide you there. So you can meditate upon them. But usually what's recommended is meditating upon the Sarupa Lakshan, upon the nature of God. The nature of God is Sada Satchidanand. We read in Jap Sab every day. That God is forever consciousness, existence, bliss. And those characteristics are like the same analogy. I go to a random passerby, and I tell them I need to get to Rambling Spudgy's house. I show him the address in Coventry.
He's like,
I go to him, and basically he's gonna say, "Look, there's a very big, Nishan Sahib outside of his house. You go there. I see the Nishan Sahib, and by the time I get there, by the time I realize, by the time I get there and become one, obviously, that that's a bit outside of the analogy, but by the time I get to the house, the flag is still going to be there.
Yeah.
So that is forever.
Yes.
Those characteristics, they're temporary.
Yeah.
But this characteristics of God being existence, not that God exists. Oftentimes when I say God is existence, God is Sat, God is consciousness, God is Chit, God is bliss, God is, Anand. I don't mean that God is existing, that God exists, that this cup here exists.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying that God is existence.
Yes. Yeah.
Not
yeah.
that God exists. Not that God exists and the world exists. No. God is existence. The only thing which you could say exists, or the definition of existence itself, is God.
Is God. Yeah.
When
yeah,
you say
yeah.
God is consciousness, I'm not saying God is conscious.
No.
God
no.
is consciousness.
Yes.
The life which brings life into this inert.
God isn't an object.
Isn't an object.
Him and the subject are the same. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where, it kind of differs there.
Yeah.
And just this vichar, it's something which is so incredibly deep, incredibly, it's the soul of Sikhi.
Yes,
but
yes.
it's never talked about.
Nah.
Even Ikko Ankar Sadguru Prasad, you can interpret it that way. Sat, referring towards existence. Gur, referring towards consciousness. Prasad,
If it's
referring
so
towards
clear,
bliss.
yeah.
And there's so many different ways of understanding that. And I think that's where kind of like, it becomes, it differs there. That Gurbani is saying that if to meditate, essentially, being a seeker, one should sit down meditating upon that, Like when you walk around, it's very easy. You're walking around, you see everything, and you're like, the existence by which all these different objects are existing is God, And when you, say for example, you eat ice cream, you're thinking to yourself that this bliss I'm experiencing, whilst eating ice cream,
like a good ice cream.
is a resemblance,
I do like a good ice cream.
is a reflection of that supreme bliss.
Yeah.
It's
like eating an eternal ice cream, isn't it?
Eternal ice cream. It's like, in all experiences of life, you can bring that in.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened in Sikhi is that we've turned, Vichar, we've turned Bhagati, we've turned the path of Sikhi into being something which is like you do sometimes. You just sit there, you say Vaheguru, done. Yeah, 1 hour Vaheguru, done my Nityanem today in the morning. I'm done for the rest of the day. It's not like that though. Sikhi is meant to be something 24/7. It's meant to be that actualization.
Yes.
That realization.
So this was a juicy question, which I have my own theory to, but I always like to ask those who are more learned to give me their wisdom. So Bibeksar discusses the concept of hukum or divine order, and this isn't anything new. Sikhi talks about hukum too, absolutely throughout the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, right? Now, the question is, and then I'll give you my own understanding, but the question is, how does the text reconcile destiny with free will in spiritual enlightenment, and what are the practical implications for this? Now, my own theory, because again, at university, I was talking about Spinoza earlier, we had to do an essay, and I can't remember what the question was, but it was something to do with Spinoza's work and free will, and so I answered it kind of from a Sikh perspective, quote unquote. And my argument was, you are born without free will, okay? You don't have free will. Sikhi says very categorically, what makes you think you have free will is your ego, all right? Everything you do, and no matter, you can't, so you're in a box, you can't come out of that box. So everything you're doing in this box is being done by existence. It's like, as in that is written or it's happened and it will happen. The bit where free will kicks in is actually when you destroy that ego or you become self-actualized, and then instead of viewing things from the prism that I have free will or I don't, you actually understand that I am it. Therefore, the action of existence and your action are not separate. You don't so that is one and the same. That explanation, though, is quite theoretical. So that's just my theory, right? Yeah. How would you connect? How would you kind of make harmony between those two concepts? That we have free will or karam on one hand, arguably, and hukum or preordained destiny on the other.
Oh, very juicy.
It's
question.
A good question, isn't it?
Very good question. We're going into the proper deep now, So when it comes to hukum and free will, it's a very big debate.
Yeah.
I've met a few people that fully hukum. Some people say you have to have free will, but the thing is, I think it's much more the way you see. It's always the perspective again, like the wave in the ocean example.
Yeah.
The sun and the setting example.
Yeah.
So it's like, if I say to you, Tika, everything is being done by God. Everything ahaya or pana, everything's pana. Yeah, I'm just gonna relax.
But
then.
everything
I've got
is
nothing to worry
pana though.
about.
Guru Arjan Dev Ji says when he sat on the Takti Tavi that
Diya kiya,
yeah,
mitha
everything
lage.
it's
all
sweet,
pana.
it's delicious,
It's sweet, it's delicious.
yeah.
So okay, there's many different examples.
I know what you're saying
Anji.
though, because at the same time you could say everything is pana and just sit here
You sit there.
and just be like, oh, I'll get all the money and all of the food or whatever it
if
is.
Gurbani is saying, "Jo kich kare hai koi abasar."
Yeah.
If you're gonna do anything, do it right now. If you're gonna go and walk on this search,
Well, yeah, because you don't know what's gonna
quest
happen
for search
next.
realization,
Yeah.
do it right now. Or it's making the sense of urgency. In one sense, it's saying hukam. Oh, you can only attain God if by the kirpa of God.
Yeah.
This. So it's all about like different ways of seeing it. From the absolute perspective, it's hukam. Everything is
course.
happening in that. Same in the dream example as well. As long as you're within the dream. So right now,
Yes,
ठीक है?
yes.
I can come here.
Yes.
I can take that cup of pani and drink it. है ना? Or I could just take that cup of pani, put it over my head. It's my choice. But from absolute perspective, it will be something else. But there's also another way of understanding it as well. I've heard many Gursikhs give this example. They give this example of a dog owner and a person. So basically, there's an example of a dog and its owner. The dog owner can decide where the dog goes. Yeah? Where he's going to take the dog for a walk. The dog owner decides how long its leash is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah? But the dog itself
Is running around.
It has the choice to go and see the poop, yeah? In the park.
Yeah.
Smell it or lick it or go away from it.
Can't
है ना?
cook it, yeah,
You know? Or it has the choice. It still has the sense of free will. है ना? In that kind of way. So you could take
But
it in
isn't
many
that
different
sense
ways.
of free will derived from your ego?
It is from the ego.
Yeah.
And even this idea of everything within the pana of God, even that at a certain point, kind of
But that's something again that has to be actualized rather than thought of.
rather than thought of.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, even hukam, karam, you kind of come to this realization that there is only that. There is, at the end of the day, there isn't anything really happening. But at the complete understanding, everything is happening in the will of God in one way. Everything's happening under His hukam. But it depends on what you understand as hukam. So, the way I personally see it is that whatever's happening is the play of God. So, in one sense, free will, the person who's thinking he has free will is also God manifesting himself as the individual, as the ignorant fool,
Yeah.
And God himself is the one orchestrating the whole play.
Yeah. Even your ignorance is orchestrated.
Exactly.
Yes.
Khel khelan.
Yeah.
Ant ko fir ek. The God, God desired that I am one, may I be many. And when he desired to be many, he put on display of the entire universe. That, Khel khelan. Gurbani describes the world as being a play of the divine. Even that understanding, the play of the divine, I think most people which, are Sikhs or call themselves Sikh or follow this idea of Sikhism or identify with this idea of Sikhism, they would have probably never heard of this idea of this whole world being a divine play of the divine. Whole divine play. God himself is the beggar in a car.
Yeah.
You find that God is the one who's sleeping. God is the one who's, waking. God is the one who's the beggar. He's the beggar who's begging for alms, and he's also the one who's being charitable and giving charity, giving alms to the beggar.
God is both of the dualities.
God is both of the dualities. Kahun Indra Padvi Chapai Chin Le Kahun. Sometimes, you're the one who gives Indra, gives the Lord of the demigods his kingdom. And at some point, you're the same guy, who's taking away his kingdom. Sometimes you're sitting in the court of the demigods, and at some point you're sitting in the court of all the demons. It's like, it's so deep because it's showing you the duality of the world, putting that mix of non-duality, putting that kind of spirit of non-duality within that, making you realize that every single experience in your life is within that framework of non-duality. Everything you're seeing. And that's not just Dasambani, Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Recently I was thinking, there's a Pangti, Kai Kot Baitat Hi Khahe. The Guru says there are hundreds and millions of people which just sit there, probably maybe, sons of a few, millionaires, and I might have £1 million in the bank, just sitting there relaxing, don't work, and there's some people which just, breaking their back, trying to work, trying just to earn a few pennies. And it's like, even that is God. Even that is the same being, manifesting in so many different forms, performing so many different plays, so many different acts. And when you come to that realization, you start to think how you start to actually say Vaheguru. Not just a Vaheguru.
But you're actually shocked.
Oh my God, it's
Yeah.
wondrous. And that's the whole thing of Vaheguru. When you chant Vaheguru, you're meant to, at some point, come to this realization of Vaheguru. It's not just meant to be just Vaheguru, Vaheguru, Vaheguru.
Yeah, it's not just
it's not just meant to be, like repeated again and again. It's something meant to be realized. That's the way I see it. I know.
All right, we've got 30 minutes left, and I've got about 5 questions, and they're all pretty juicy.
No worries, buddy.
If we don't get through them,
we don't get
through
rapid
them.
speed. Don't
but
worry.
I do think that we're probably going to need a part 2 because there's so much more that I want to discuss with you. However, coming back to this, so with the Bibeksar, the text explores the nature of faith and knowledge, suggesting that, again, direct quote, faith is that which derives from knowledge, but also acknowledging that sometimes faith derived from our own mind can be a source of liberation. The text presents faith as both derived from knowledge and at times as a liberating force even when not originating from knowledge. However, in my humble opinion, faith can often be blind, rooted in authority rather than understanding. So often we believe something because someone older than us, bigger than us, wiser than us, whatever the word is, something that makes them better in whatever way has told us that. All right?
Yeah.
This raises the question, which if anyone's done an A-level philosophy and ethics, A-level in philosophy and ethics will know this example, which is, how does one discern true faith from mere assumption? If belief alone was sufficient, so belief in whatever it is, the deity, a god figure, whatever, surely any imagined deity, for argument's sake, a spaghetti monster, could promise salvation.
Yeah.
So how does faith work in this setup?
Very, very loaded question. I'll try and do as much as I can.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, when it comes to faith, the whole idea of faith in Sikhi, in Gurbani, in the Sampradaya, in the traditional Nirmala understanding of Gurbani, it's that there's a threefold path.
Yeah.
Sarvan, Manan, Nididhyasan. You listen to it, you listen to Gurbani with Nishcha, with faith, and then afterwards, Manan. You basically sit there and you try to use all your arguments, your logical arguments, to try and kind of question it.
Yeah.
Even Prashnottari, it's a
question and answer.
So you try your best to question the teaching of the Guru in one way.
But is the first bit really faith, or is it actually just acceptance to listen and to hear it out?
So it depends on your definition of faith. Because when it comes to faith, it's like, buddy, you asked me to come here to the studio and for the podcast, everything. You must have had some level of faith
that you turn up.
That I would turn up.
Yeah, of course.
Some level of faith. So again, Sikhi is not saying Andhvishwas. Sikhi is not saying merely blind faith. Sikhi is completely against that. What Sikhi is saying is you have to have a certain level of faith. You have to have a certain level of ego. For example, self-realization. You have to have a certain level of faith that this will happen, this will work for it to actually happen. And obviously those people which do walk on the path of the self-realization, they know it's a very, sturdy path. It's a path full of many different obstacles. So it's like, you have to have a little bit of faith. But the path of Gurbani, Gaviya, Suniya, Man Rakhiya Pao. So this idea of Sarvan, Mananididhyasan, listening, contemplation, and deep actualization, deep contemplation, deep realization. This is the threefold path. Sarvan, listening, with faith. Then, trying to tackle that understanding by the means of logic, but not just dry logic, not in the sense of, I want to beat this, I want to kind of destroy this viewpoint. No, but with the sense of curiosity.
But it's
With
to
the sense
understand
of-
it.
To understand
Yeah,
it.
yeah, so
not in the
what-
sense of ego
so-
that
yeah, yeah,
my teacher said this to me, I'm going to try and do all I can to disprove it. No.
But it's more
just-
so questioning what it is and what it isn't, so that you understand clearly what you've put your faith in.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's the Gaviya Suniya, listening, understanding, man rakhiya pao.
So faith is a part of it, but it's not blind faith.
It's not blind
because
faith.
Sikhi isn't orthodoxy; it's orthopraxy. We practice rather than believe.
Exactly. And also, when it comes to spaghetti monster,
Yeah,
a very
yeah.
beautiful analogy. I personally believe this. Sikhi, in some sense, has this aspect of universalism as well. The sense of any person from any faith,
Yeah.
they can attain
Yes.
self-realization.
Yeah, completely.
And the thing with that is, it's not about the form which you meditate upon, but it's the way in which you do it, the mood behind it. It's like, if you take, for example, obviously, when it comes towards, modern day scenarios, when we look at Islam, when we look at Christianity, certain acts by certain prophets might be seen as questionable. We might say, how can you attain liberation if you're thinking of X, Y, and Z prophet to be, the supreme avatar, in this age? And the thing there is that it's not about the form which you worship. Like for example, Sufis, they see the Prophet Muhammad as being their beloved. They kind of see Allah as being their beloved. They see, when they look at the world, they try and see Prophet Muhammad inside of that. They see Prophet Muhammad to be the seal of the prophets. They see him in that way. And the thing there is, obviously, some people might say something like, they were questionable or anything. And obviously, I'm nobody to decide, but that might be somebody's viewpoint. But the thing is, it's not about the form you worship, but it's the mood, the devotion you worship with, So I personally believe if you take that glass of water and you worship that glass of water, with love, with faith, you can attain self-realization. I believe that. Any form, any personality, but it's about the love. It's about the devotion. I think if you strive to become one with God, God will find you in some way or
Anything
form.
that strips your ego, then.
Anything which strips your ego, exactly.
Okay, I like that answer. That was really good. So the text uses metaphors, and you've used a few just as we're talking, such as the sun and sunlight, to explain the relationship between Paratma and Jeev Atma, and in various other instances. How do metaphors and poetic imagery shape the seeker's perception of the divine by making the formless more comprehensible? In other words, why is it that most of these texts are written in poetry?
Because when you look at it in poetry,
Yes.
Okay, in poetry, one thing, by writing something in poetry, it becomes
And all of the analogies
much
and
more
the metaphors.
memorable. Do you get? You can
good
memorize
point.
it very
like
easily.
songs, innit? You put a song on and you can know the lyrics, and though you've not like
Exactly. Even the jal, even the way it's
The
like,
beat.
the
Yeah.
beat. Dohra is 13, then 11 syllables.
And is
like,
it Jab side that has the gallop?
Yeah, you got the gallop, huh?
Yeah.
The Muslim Gale,
Yeah.
You have that kind of those poetical meters. They have that kind of beat. They have that kind of they want to make you memorize it.
Yes, it
and
really
they
helps
stick
with
in your
it.
head.
Yeah.
And that's a very big thing as well. And also one more thing. If I write, so for example, one more reason why, if you look at Jab Sahib, especially, there's a whole system which kind of protects it from being interpolated, and that is when you write something in poetry, it's very hard to write. It's very hard to copy somebody's poetry. That's
Yes,
also one
or
big
to
thing as
edit
well.
it, yeah.
To edit it as well, because
Yeah.
you can notice, the person's style.
Yeah.
With writing,
The
if you've
beat.
written me an email,
Yeah.
I could
Yeah,
use
yeah.
ChatGPT
Yeah.
try and do that.
Yeah.
But that's also one thing as well.
It's like forensics of the text, isn't it? Yeah.
And also, when it comes towards analogies and metaphors, if we believe God is manifested in creation, we must be able to infer reality from creation. All the great sages, all our great gurus, they've taken examples from creation. Why? Because in creation, we can have a glimpse of God. We can have a glimpse of that supreme reality, And it's like, that is also a very big reason why. When we look at the examples of the ocean, of the wave, when we look at the examples of the sun and its rays, we look at all these different examples. The thing is, we find that God, He reflects in this world. He reflects in this reality. Like, the dream. The dream reality is based upon the actual waking reality.
Yeah,
If you think about it, the dream reality is based on the waking reality. Okay. In the waking, I saw ramblings of a Sikh. And now my dream, I'm seeing ramblings of a Sikh. So that's
Sounds like
based
a
upon
nightmare.
that. So I can infer the supreme reality from this false, from this illusory reality, because it contains the reflection. It contains like those. The example I would give is like those rays of light, from that sun, from that Vaheguru. We can understand that Vaheguru from those small rays, from those different, parts of reality, which we are seeing in this world, be it creation, be it different day-to-day activities. We can try and use those examples to understand the supreme reality. Because at the end of the day, if God can't be seen in these analogies, he's not accessible.
Yeah.
And how can we access God in creation
How can we describe
if we can't understand him, if we can't infer his existence from creation? Obviously, I don't want to go too much into it, but one example I'll give you is, okay, so Paji, you're here, Hana, you come to me and you slap me on the face, Hana. I'm going to be, Paji, why did you slap me on the face? Hana, why did you slap me on the face? And what's going to happen is, I'm going to say my head is hurting. Look, you slapped me on my head, or you punched me in the face, my nose is hurting, Hana. If my nose is hurting, I can't be my nose. If my head is hurting, I can't be my nose. I can't be my head. If my brain isn't braining, I can't be the brain. If anything I experience, I can't be. Even the ego, when you say I am is an experience. When you say I am this, I am is an experience.
True.
So the I itself is an experience. You can't be the I, you can't be the ego, you can't be the mind. So even that, you can take creation, you can take the world created by God, and even these assumptions of reality which we have, and you can question them by creation. You can access, you can become curious unto who I truly am by, delving deep into creation. So somebody's hit me in the face, I'm thinking, now, obviously, first I'm going to be a bit pissed. But later on, I'm going to start thinking, man, okay, if my head is hurting, if I am hurt by this, if my body is hurt by this, I can't be the body. I have to be something more. And what is that I? So in creation, you can infer that supreme reality. By creation, you can understand God. That's the way I personally see it.
No. Obviously, the text discusses the role of the Sad Sangat, or the company of the holy, and it's repeatedly emphasized. Beyond mere social interaction, what specific benefits does Bibeksar attribute to associating with the wise, and how does this association facilitate spiritual progress? I guess this is kind of similar to earlier when you were talking about having like a teacher, and I guess it's the same thing.
I think it's the same thing, and it's also that, let me give you this example. I'm not too sure, but I think it was Usain Bolt,
Yeah.
When I think, not Usain Bolt, there was another person who would, win a few races, like a sprinter, and basically, before he finished that sprint, everybody thought it was impossible to do that. But once he did that, people even surpassed him.
Yep.
So it's the fact that you have a guiding light, you have somebody there to motivate you, you have somebody there which is also on the path, and it doesn't feel lonely. Because I felt this as well. Sometimes when you're alone, you've got no friends, no Sikhs that you can hang out with, talk to them about this type of stuff. You feel lonely, you feel demotivated. But the moment you find people with a like-minded kind of goal of becoming one, of self-realization, of God-realization, it becomes a whole different scenario.
Yeah, completely.
So, I think that's a very big thing. For me personally as well, Sadhu Sangat has always helped me. And I think without my friends, without the God Sikhs I know, I think I would never, be able to come to this point. Even the Khalsa itself is a Sadhu Sangat. Bhai Gurdas says, he defines Sadhu Sangat. Sadhu Sangat doesn't just mean a whole congregation of Sangat. It means ik Sikh, doye Sadhu Sang. Even right now, this is Sadhu Sangat.
Yeah.
Bhai Gurdas says, if there's 2 Sikhs together, that is Sadhu Sangat. Panji Parmeshwar, and if you have 5, that's God himself right in front of you. So it's like, right
Quality.
now, we've got Sadhu Sangat right now. Ramling Sikh Bhaji, we've got
quality.
Sadhu Sangat podcast right here.
I like that.
Ohi Babaji, Maji's Kirpate. That's the thing. It just guides you, it just helps you, on that path. But I think I haven't been able to go too much into Bibeksar itself, I think, really.
Well, we've got about 10-15 minutes left. I've got one last question, and then we can obviously dive into it a little bit more, which is, so the ultimate aim of the spiritual journey is obviously self-realization, liberation, actualization, whatever word you want to put on it. Based on the excerpts, what are some of the key characteristics of a liberated being or a Jivan Mukut? as implied by Bibeksar, and how does the text suggest one can move beyond intellectual understanding? So this is the thing, which I think academia is really... Traditionally, academia is really bad at this. I think it's getting better now that there are people, for argument's sake, like Javala and others who bring their lived experience into the academic work. But a lot of academic work on being enlightened is academic. It's not a lived experience. It's theoretical. It's like, just like I was saying earlier, my theory of free will and hukum, it's completely theoretical because my bhakti is like about this much. And I need to understand, I need to obliterate the ego in order to test my theory, right? So I've got a while to go. So coming back to this, what does the text say? Like, how do you define or differentiate, or what are the characteristics of someone who is completely liberated? I've had the fortune to meet a couple, and I can tell you my experiences. But from the text, what's like the checklist?
A checklist. I think there are certain ways. I think you can come to a realization. You can kind of understand, infer. There's no definite way, because the reason is, like, even Guru Nanak. Like, I think even Guru Nanak talks about Koya ke putna. Somebody would call him being kind of taken over by a ghost, Hana? Like there's a ghost who's taken over Guru Nanak's body. Somebody says he's a divana, he's a madman in love. Somebody says he's an Adam, he's just a normal, geezer walking on the street.
Geezer.
But then, for somebody he's a guru. And the thing is, it's like, when it comes towards understanding who is truly self-realized, forget about Brahmagyanis, forget about self-realized people, just how gurus, people weren't able to recognize the light of Guru Nanak. How can we recognize a Brahmagyani, a self-realized soul? And if the world wasn't able to recognize Guru Nanak, it's... So the thing is that at the end of the day, Brahmagyani ki gat, Brahmagyani jana. Only a Brahmagyani, a person who knows God, can actually, kind of know who actually knows God, or who too is a Brahmagyani. So the thing is, characteristics is very hard. Bhagat Kabir, he was a weaver. He was a Jalaha, he was a weaver. When you look at Bhagat Namdev Ji, they were a chimba with dye cloth. If you see, Bhagat Kabir Ji, you're probably not going to think that this person is self-realized. When you see, these different people, just by what they're wearing, but what they do, how they're living, you won't kind of understand them to be that. Okay, buddy, for all I know, you can be, poster, being a Brahmagyani, wearing...
You know what? The only reason I asked that question is because I've had the fortune to have met some Mahapurukhs in the past. And I think you can tell. I think when you're sat with them, you can feel something in the... I don't know what the word is. There's like an electricity. But also the way they engage with you. Like I remember one time, this Mahapurukh called Baba Arjan Singh Ji, ironically, right? From Birmingham. A lot of people would, I think, know of him. Unfortunately or fortunately, he passed away maybe like 10, 15 years ago. Maybe even more now because I am old. And he'd always be laughing. He'd always be joking. He'd want... the last time he ever spoke to me before he passed away, he was like, come here. And he looked at my hand, and then he looked at me, and he looked at my hand, and then he laughed, and he was like, go sit back down again. And I was just like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like, you can't do this. And so I think you can tell, and hence the question comes from there. Just rewinding a little bit, we've got like 10, 12 minutes left, and the only reason I'm so quick on the time is they kick you out once your time's up, right? So we've been talking about Bibeksar, which is, if I'm correct, it's written by... The contributions are keep by Adan Shah writes it. Yes. Okay. He is one of the heads of the Nirmalas at that point, right?
So with Bibeksar, what you find is it's actually a Sevapanthi text.
Okay.
It's actually a Sevapanthi text.
Okay.
So the only thing is that Tirth Singh Nirmala, he was a Nirmala. So that's why he commentated upon it, because it talked about non-duality. If you look at the text itself, it's Sevapanthi.
Okay.
So it's not...
Yeah, because by Kanaya Ji Huni, it's from that lineage.
It's from that lineage. And obviously by Kanaya Ji, by Adan Shah Ji. And with that is that, I think by Adan Shah Ji especially, they were even known by Bulleh Shah as well.
Yes.
So it's like, when you look at that, when you start thinking about that way, that you have all this connection there. So with that text with Bibeksar, again, it's a prashnottari. It's a question between the disciple and the guru. Oftentimes with these texts, even if there's not a disciple and there's not a guru, asking these questions, it's just written in that dialogue format to kind of be much more personal. To be conventional. The Galea that Bibeksar, if you look at it, just look at the word Vivek. Vivek is discernment, knowing between what is real, what is false. That is Vivek. You know? So it kind of stimulates you to think about that. You know, what is real, what is false? You know? Like, you know, there's a very beautiful way of understanding. Like, sometimes in my katha recently, I was doing katha, I was saying that, are you enjoying worldly pleasures or are they enjoying you? That's the way to understand it. You know, are you, like, you know, there's, you know, because this is actually coming from Parthari, great Indian philosopher. He says, are you enjoying worldly pleasures or are they enjoying you? Okay, let me give you an example. For example, say I've ordered a book online. You know, obviously you're a great book collector. You love books.
I definitely
you've got a very beautiful reel series on Instagram.
I do try, yes.
And, you know, when you buy a book, and you'll see this, when you buy a book, the wait for the book seems like, you know, much more...
There's an excitement in it.
There's an excitement in, you know, waiting for that book to come. And it's, you know, kind of the same thing here when it comes towards... What was I saying again, Babadi? My brain. Braining.
I actually have forgotten as well. We were talking about...
Bibeksar.
Oh, discerning between what's correct and what's false, basically.
Discerning...
No, it's fine, man. We've been talking for like 2 hours.
The discerning between what is, you know, real, what is false. And that's essentially, if you look at it, the kind of whole goal of Bibeksar. And I don't know how I got to that, you know, analogy.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
It was related to something. I'm just missing it right now, obviously.
No, it's cool,
maybe
man.
in a part 2 we
can... My last question then, because we've only got like 5-6 minutes left, which is...
No worries, Sanji.
And I guess I could probably edit this to put this at the beginning, but who are the Nirmalas and what role do they play in shaping Sikh intellectual traditions? You've obviously mentioned Bibeksar is a Sevapanthi text, and that's true because it does come from the Paikaneya lineage, and that's absolutely fine. But who are the Nirmalas? And how does it all work? How does it all connect? Because I think a lot of people's modern idea would be that Nirmalas are a grey area between Sikhs and Hindus.
Yeah. So I think with Nirmalas and Udasis is much more their missionaries, you know. They went around preaching Guru Sikhi, and it wasn't just about teaching Sikhi, it was about bringing people together to walk on the path of Dharma, Dharam, you know. And when it comes to that, Guru Gobind Singh, the whole story goes, and many people don't know about this story.
Yeah.
The story goes that once Guru Gobind Singh in his court, full of, different scholars, you know, he would have many different scholars to do katha, to do oral discourse on different texts, you know, have them write commentaries. We know about the Anandpur Darbar, obviously. I think you might have interviewed Satnam Singh, maybe you are going to.
We're going to. I'm waiting to have him,
So you've got that. You got the Anandpur Darbar, you've got all these different things going on. And there was even a Darbar in Paonta Sahib, where the Guru stayed for a bit. And in Paonta Sahib, there was a few Gursikhs, they thought, you know, we want to really learn this. We want to know what this is talking about. These texts are talking about the Mahabharata, all these different philosophical, even regarding logic. This Indian logic, Nyay. There's a way of understanding, there's a way of, you know, kind of putting out questions, there's a way of questioning, there's a way of understanding, you know, trying to understand all those different things. So those Gursikhs, they would listen to this, but they were thinking, why don't we learn this? They wanted to learn as well. So they went to one of the Pandits there called Pandit Raghunath. So they went to Pandit Raghunath. He was obviously in the Darbar of Guru Gobind Singh. And they say, you know, we really want to study this. You know, can you please teach us? And first he's like, okay, I'll teach you. He starts teaching, but then he says, okay, can you tell me which castes you guys are from? You know, and one guy says, I'm a Jat. Yeah. One guy says, I'm a Tarkhan. One says, I'm a Chamar, I'm a Chimba. And every single person is from a different caste. Every single person from a lower caste. And he's like, look, I can't do this. If I teach these people, then all the Brahmins,
everyone in it,
all the Brahmins are going to be coming after me that, you know, that you've got no respect for the Vidya, that you're giving this out to these lower castes, and they're not worthy of this Vidya.
Usual
gatekeep this Vidya. And basically, he said no to them. I'm not going to teach you, go away, get lost. And those Gursikhs, they were a bit pissed as well. They were like, they went to Guru Gobind Singh and they said, look Maharaji, we want to learn, all these different branches of knowledge. You've got these people here, we really want to learn. And we want to learn from an authentic tradition, And what happens is that Guru Gobind Singh's there and he brings Pandit Raghunath in. He says, okay, look, why do you want to teach my Sikhs? And he says, they're lower castes. How can I teach them? Because obviously Guru Gobind Singh was still of a higher caste. He was a Khatri and he was a Kshatri. And basically, I can't teach them. And he says, Guru Gobind Singh says, the people which you call lower caste, which you call Shudras, he says one day they will teach great Brahmin scholars. They will be the ones teaching them. And that future statement of Guru Gobind Singh, it came to actualization. That when Guru Gobind Singh saw this, he was like, okay, the people that you're calling lower caste, they will teach great Brahmins. And what happens is Guru Gobind Singh then sends 5 Sikhs. Sant Veer Singh, Sant Ram Singh, Sant Ganda Singh, Sant Sena Singh, Sant Karm Singh, these 5 Gursikhs, he takes them and he sends them to Kashi, to Banaras, to go and study these different branches of knowledge. And he sends them to Chetan Mat, the place where Bhai Gurdas Ji actually went. And they wrote the Sanskrit hymn towards... It's so interesting when you look at our history, it's so deep. And obviously, time is running short, but Bhai Gurdas had written the Vaheguru Stotra there in Sanskrit. In the Sanskrit language, in Sanskrit vernacular, he had written down a hymn towards Vaheguru. He had made 500 Gursikhs in the city of Benares. And that's where he sent the 5 Singhs to go and study there. And Guru Gobind Singh had given them this boon that the Vidya that will take years for people to attain, you will attain in a matter of mere months. And from that, the Nirmala tradition came. And when the Nirmalas, again, what happened was Guru Gobind Singh, after 13 years, he sent a letter to the Nirmalas. He said, look, come to Anandpur Sahib. And when they came to Anandpur Sahib, what happened was Amrit, the Khalsa had also been created. And then, historical records say that they had taken Amrit then. And when they took Amrit, there were 2 Pyaras, 2 of the Panj Pyare, which guided them, which kind of became their ustads in one way. And that was Bhai Daya Singh Ji and Bhai Dharam Singh Ji. So they are essentially all lineages of Nirmala. They stem down from either Bhai Daya Singh or Bhai Dharam Singh.
Oh, wow. I never knew that. I knew the bit about them going to Kashi, but I didn't know about Bhai Daya Singh, Bhai Dharam Singh.
That's the whole tradition. But when they were coming back from Kashi, the people of Kashi were so attached to them, they said, please, can you give us at least one way that we can remember you?
Yeah.
And they took the son of Pandit Sadanand, if I'm correct. And they had taken the son of Pandit Sadanand and they had given him initiation into the Nirmala Samprada.
Wow.
So that's how the whole tradition of Nirmala started.
Oh, man.
And
so historically, originally they did take Amrit then?
Yeah, so that's what's believed, but again, different people have different views.
There's
Obviously,
different versions of the history.
But the thing with Nirmala is that Nirmala are taught to go beyond the body. So with Nirmala, they kind of they're not obligated to keep the kakars.
I see what you mean.
That's what they do wear the kada, the kanga, hana. They do wear all that type of stuff, the kanga, they keep the kesh. But the Kshatri kakars, the kashera, the reason why we wear kashera is because when you're going to battle, you can't be sitting there in a dhoti like this. You can't be sitting on a horse like this. It's very hard. And also the kada, again, it's a martial kind of...
Yeah, it's a weapon.
It's a weapon.
Yeah.
All these different things. So that's essentially it. And most Sant traditions, like be it Sant Ishwar Singh Ji, Dada Sahib, you've probably seen them, or Nanak Sar, and even like, certain Vidya Pranali, certain lineages of Vidya, even in Taksal, they stem from the Nirmal Samprada, or they're related in some way. Nanak Sar, Rara Sahib, all your favorite Sant Samaj, they all, come from that same tradition of Nirmala. Nanak Sar, be it Rara Sahib, claims, it clearly says we come from the Bhai Daya Singh Samprada. But many people don't know that Bhai Daya Singh Samprada is the Nirmala Samprada, is the Nirmala, so...
I just want to say thank you. I know we've rushed through a hell of a lot in 2 hours, and there's probably still so much more that I would love to discuss with you. So we'll definitely have to do a part 2. Obviously, people watching, feel free to let us know what you think of it in the comments and anything else that you'd like me to quiz him about, because we could go on for hours. I just want to say thank you once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's so much more that we could talk about, but unfortunately time doesn't permit. So thank you.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. No, shut it
I
down,
love
buddy.
this. This is why I enjoy what I do, because the
Well, but
conversation
to be
is the
honest,
best.
I think I haven't been able to go much into depth, but I think maybe some other time they can.
Yeah.